Hello and welcome to this special episode recorded at the On Think Tanks Conference 2026 here in Rabat, Morocco. This year marks the 10th edition of the conference, bringing together think tank leaders, researchers and funders from around the world to reflect on a pressing question: how can think tanks remain trustworthy and relevant in a time when trust in institutions is under strain? I am joined today by two fantastic guests, Schoder, Executive Director at the R Street Institute, and Héctor Cárdenas, President of the Mexican Council on Foreign Relations, COMEXI. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to host you here at the Policy Center for the New South. And I want to first, before we dive in, I want to come back to the central question of the OTT conference this year, which is trust. And I want to ask you, what are the biggest challenges think tanks face today when it comes to building and maintaining trust in our institutions? And I can start with you, Erika, if you want.
Yes, trust is, we've been talking about this at this conference for at least 3 years now. Actually, at Chatham House 3 years ago, it was developing as a theme, and I think it's become even more important. Trust. What kind of trust do we need? Is it sectoral? Is it organizational as think tanks? Is it interpersonal? And I think the answer that I've come to, just from sort of sense making around the community, is that we have to start with that fundamental trust between people that happens in encounters between one another, that interpersonal trust, and that's a foundation for the trust that happens in institutional trust and sectoral trust.
What about you, Héctor?
Well, I completely agree with Erica in the sense that trust comes out of the relationships that you build with people. The problem, I think, is that we're living in an era of such polarization that even getting together with somebody that has different ideas than you do is hard. So imagine building trust. You'd still first have to meet the person, right? And sometimes you don't even get that. You didn't even get that convening power that we used to have. I mean, it used to be that politicians and think tankers and academics, we talked to each other across different divides. You know, people who had completely different political, ideological stances, they would talk to each other. They would play tennis together. Yeah. You know, they would go to coffee. Mm-hmm. And now that has shifted in many countries, not everywhere, but in many countries that has shifted. Certainly in Latin America, we see a deep polarization, not unlike what's happened in the United States. And so if you have that deep polarization, then you have to ask yourself other questions about how do you bridge that gap? How do you create that bridge so that you're able to meet the people, you're able to create meaningful personal relationships that then lead to trust-building exercises like you would, in conflict zones, mm-hmm. right? It's almost like our whole world has become a conflict zone.
Absolutely. We work with different people from different perspectives and different backgrounds, not only in the political sphere. And how can think tanks balance today visibility and credibility when it's in increasingly noisy information environments? Would you like to reflect on that question?
I can start. Mm-hmm. I think credibility is absolutely fundamental. So you can have visibility without credibility, and I don't think that's actually very helpful. So I think first a think tank has to focus on internal credibility, the things that make your entire organization credible, your culture within your organization credible, and then you actually use that as a foundation to show and demonstrate through behaviors, do you actually act in accordance with your values, with what are you who you say you are, and then that's how you demonstrate your credibility, and you become visible. Now, the information ecosystem is very noisy, so that is the challenge. How do we become visible?
So yeah, I think credibility has a lot to do with your internal processes, and how clearly you identify your values, what you stand for, how clearly you can specify what are allowable and disallowable practices, and that creates that internal cohesion that gives you credibility and makes sure that it keeps you tied to the truth, right? It keeps you grounded in truth. That's really important. But unfortunately, I don't think that's enough anymore. I think you also now have to make sure that you understand the dialogue or lack thereof that is happening in society. And then you have to create stories around the facts and the analyses that you put out. You have to package them in stories so that that story can travel, and it can travel through that gap, and that you can reach people who might have been unreachable had you just presented the evidence, the unburnished evidence, the way that you might have done maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I think now you have to give a lot of attention to the way you package the information, to the stories that you weave around that information. If you do it right, then you can widen your audience. Otherwise, you're just going to be preaching to the converted, as they say, like preaching to the choir. And you want to do something else, right? I mean, we at Comexi, we're a membership organization, which is great because there's a lot of plurality and diversity within ourselves, right? Which you might not find in a more traditional think tank where you're hiring staff. And so there's a certain, endogamic kind of trend there. I think with membership organizations, you can do a little bit more outreach and get different perspectives.
Yeah, Erica, you emphasized the importance for think tanks about the way they identify themselves and the way they define their own values, and for their staff members, their structure, their governance systems work and really represent those values to gain in credibility in the local and international sphere. We have attended some sessions about communications and branding here at the OTT conference, and there was very important sessions about how can we bridge academia and policymakers and to meet real-world policy challenges today in different contexts in Latin America, in Europe, here in Morocco and Africa. And branding is very important today. Do you have a word to say about communications today in the think tank world?
Yes, this is not my specialty. I think your keynote was exceptional. So if they want to hear more, they should listen to your keynote, Hector. But I would say whatever you do, however you communicate it, make sure you're authentic to those values and principles, because that's what people want to see. That's what builds trust. I think that too often we've positioned ourselves as sort of disinterested observers in the world, but we're not. We are human beings. We have values. We have principles. Organizations have values and principles, and we're organized around wanting to make change. Policy change in the world. We have a vision for the future, and we want it to be better. So we actually have to display that and then contest them, and then have plural visions of the future.
Yeah.
No, absolutely right. I mean, that's the basis for communication. Has to be truth, right? And truth not just in the sense of facts that are verifiable, but also truth about where you're coming from. Right, what your position is, what your view of the future is, what are you trying to move forward as an agenda, right? I think that's fundamental. Now, I think that from the communications point of view, and I don't have to tell you because this is your job, right? It's become so complicated and so exhausting because you have to communicate on so many different levels. You've got to communicate in the old-fashioned way, right? And you communicate through press releases, and you communicate through the briefings that you publish and so forth. You also have to communicate with all the new means of communication, right? A podcast, right? But also a TikTok reel and an AI mediated artifact of some sort. You have to be on the radar, and it's always dangerous because you can get swept up just by the inertia of that, and then forget that just being there is not what you want. You want to be there with meaning, right? And so to be out there means that you have to very carefully choose when you're out there and when you stay home, right? Because otherwise you get a lot of visibility, but you can still be irrelevant.
Absolutely. You have mentioned that the Comexi is all about the memberships of the Comexi, and there is a sort of distinctiveness of the members that are part of the Comexi. And I mean by that you have the ability also for the members to build some networks. What role should collaboration and networks play in strengthening trust? And we can start with you, and maybe you can bring some real-world experience.
No, I think, collaboration and networks are fundamental, at least for the work that we do. It might be different for different kinds of think tanks who are based in different areas. But for us, we're an international relations and global affairs think tank. So we have to have international relations, right? We have to have the relations part is fundamental to the mission of Comexi. So we spend a lot of time facilitating encounters, convenings, going to conferences, bringing conferences to Mexico, creating webinars. We have a monthly webinar that we do in collaboration with UCSD, for example, University of California, San Diego, the Mexico Center there. That's really useful. It's a collaboration, right? And we co-moderate. The director there and I co-moderate that webinar. It amplifies our voice, right? But we do many other things like that. We collaborate with our other think tanks. I just came back from Washington, D.C., where I was at the Council of Councils meeting, which brings together the major foreign affairs councils of the world under the auspices of the Council of Foreign Relations, the U.S. Council. So that is a very big part of what we do. And domestically, we have to offer all of that exposure to our members. Our members want to be a part. So we've done something really interesting. This was my predecessor started this about 5-6 years ago. We created these work groups. And so we had, at the beginning, we had about 30. Now we have about 20 because not everything survives. It's evolutionary. But that allows our membership to participate. And they meet, they draft things, they produce analyses, they host webinars that is independent of sort of the direct, the executive direction of Comexi. They work on their own. It's like a network of networks, and it's incredibly useful and incredibly productive.
That's amazing. Do you have something to say maybe about the Art Institute, how the institution is building networks? We have heard from Hector the webinar collaborations with other structures. Maybe you can elaborate on that.
In fact, I want to bring in something that was said at this conference, and it was a distinction about community and networks. So building a community or building networks. And the OTT community is truly a community, not just a network. And we at R Street have benefited from it. It's been around for about 15 years. We've been around for about 14 years. And for the entire time, I feel like we've sort of grown up with it, leveraging this incredibly diverse network of think tankers with so many different contexts and so much knowledge to put into the room. And they've all been so generous with their knowledge for the whole community. And we've done this over encounters, not just every year in conferences, but, virtually and throughout the year. And so OTT is really building a community. And I think that was kind of an interesting distinction between networking and networks and community. And a community has a different feel and a different level of commitment.
And I think maybe this is also the core message of the On Think Tanks conference, especially in the 10th edition, is to build a community and to sustain it for the future in order to build networks that are useful for societies and for the world in general. I have one last question for both of you. When looking ahead, what is the one thing that think tanks should do differently to remain relevant in today's world?
Well, I think if I had to narrow it down to one thing is we have to put ourselves in the shoes of the policymakers that we're trying to influence. Because in the end, that's what think tanks are there for. They're here, as Erika said, we're here to make change, right? And you won't make change if you don't have influence on policymakers. And to have influence, you need to understand them. You need to have, one of the people at the conference said, empathy. You need to have empathy. You need to understand the challenges that they face, the constraints under which they operate. And if you understand that, then you can better tailor what you say and you can have actual influence. And that's fundamental. And this community, and it's palpable. I mean, I'm a first-time attendee, but I can feel that this is a community. This community can really help in taking think tanks in that direction.
Absolutely.
I would agree, and I would like to add to put yourself in the shoes of the people who are affected by public policy, and to create more spaces for knowledge production to happen between the people that are affected by public policy and think tanks, and being that bridge between think tanks and policymakers.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this insightful discussion. It was a pleasure to host both of you here at the Policy Center for the New South on the sidelines of the 10th Conference of On Think Tanks. Dear audience, thank you very much for following us. Thank you.